Hello and welcome to the Freelance Festival, where each week we meet new business owners who share their expertise on how to run a successful business. This week, PR consultant Carolina Throssell will be sharing her tips on what kind of content work best to increase your engagement online, and some of the best ways to secure press to promote your business.
Hi, thanks for joining me. My name is Carolina Throssell. A little about me, I started my career as a journalist before moving into public relations, which I've been doing for the past 15 years or so. I founded Iden Marketing in March 2020 to offer freelance public relations and content creation, primarily for travel and technology businesses. As part of this presentation, I'm going to be talking about how you can boost your business profile, and I'll be sharing some hints and advice along the way as well. During my career, I've represented big well-known companies to smaller startups and everything in between, and for a variety of sectors. And although the medium to get that message out has evolved over the years, what hasn't changed is that content, and more specifically, good content at that, is crucially important. So in this session, I'm going to be covering the importance of your story, how to nail your narrative, how to increase engagement, how to be recognized as an expert, some ideas on how you can get press coverage, and then I will finish with some takeaways and hopefully some actionable advice that you can actually use in your own business. So first of all, let's talk about the importance of your story. I want you to think back to one of your earliest childhood memories. The chances are it involved a bedtime story. As human beings, we are conditioned from an early age to engage in stories, as well as to tell them. Just look at what's happening with COVID and how everyone is eager to share their stories of how they're living through the pandemic and how it's affecting them or their family. Now, I know what you're thinking. You're probably thinking, what has this got to do with business? Or maybe that your story isn't remarkable enough to share. But you'd be wrong. People buy from people, and it is storytelling that can boost your business profile, either by someone who identifies with your story and wants to work with you as a result, or maybe you're just the right fit for an editorial piece that a journalist is working on where they might be able to mention your business. In fact, if you think about some of the biggest companies or entrepreneurs today, a lot of the press coverage will speak to their origin story, whether their business was started from the kitchen table or a market stall. But it's not just in the press where origin stories can work. They can also lend themselves to social media content. The how it started versus how it's going thread is a really good illustration of this. So from someone who dreamt of becoming a pilot, who did, to a small business owner getting their product onto the supermarket shelves, and then finally a singer playing in front of a bigger crowd. So you can imagine how this could work for your own business, as well as how your story has evolved. If you use a lot of equipment in your job, you could always try a comparison of the tech you used when you started compared with today. Nostalgia is always a really good popular thread on social media, so it's one that you could always experiment with. I actually saw a really great example of this from a tech publication, which used this as a basis of an idea for how tech had evolved. So they used VHS in the how it started section and then compared that with Netflix for the how it's going comparison. But outside of popular social media trends, if you're going to use your origin story in other content forms, much like a good book, just having a story isn't enough. And you also need to think about structure to ensure you nail your narrative. And there's actually some science behind what makes a story resonate. I recently read an article in Harvard Business Review where the author used neuroscience, and in particular oxytocin, to explore how compelling a well-constructed narrative can be. This quote actually comes from that article. His research had discovered that character-driven stories with emotional content tended to result in a better understanding of the key points that a speaker wished to make, and it also enabled better recall of those points weeks later. It's fairly documented that oxytocin creates a positive signal in the brain, But the researchers also concluded that this trigger of oxytocin could be hacked by the narrative having some kind of struggle before the eventual triumph, because people were more invested in what they were watching. It's also when you start to analyse origin stories in the press that you'll often find it begins with a struggle before the eventual triumph. Many of you might have become freelancers because of some struggle, either related to your personal life or because you wanted to achieve something that your corporate 9-to-5 job just couldn't deliver, or maybe both. And it actually reminded me of a Daily Mail article I've read around business owners whose perceived disability became their superpower, and where it might have held them back if they weren't their own boss. So one woman spoke of her OCD, another autism, and the third dyslexia. So if you've had a setback, faced discrimination, or beaten the odds, use that messaging in your story. You'll be surprised by how many opportunities will come to you as a result that can help profile your business. After all, it's human nature to seek out success stories and to be inspired by them, which is why they work so well. Speaking of oxytocin, I do have a reason for including this cat picture, and not just because it might help you remember me and my business. It relates to increasing engagement through content. For many freelancers or small businesses, when they think about sharing content to raise their profile, the first place they will often turn to is social media. But the biggest question I'm often asked is, how do I get more engagement? Now, I'm not going to give you a list of what to post or what not to post, because you do need to decide what's right for your business, but it is worth bearing a couple of things in mind. And the first one is how animals in pictures can boost engagement. According to Taboola Trends, using an animal in pictures can boost the click-through rate by 96%. And as you can see from the picture, it doesn't just mean adding cat memes to your content, although obviously you can. But if you have pets, why not incorporate them into your social media content? This example could obviously lend itself to a photographer, but it could work just as well if you're a copywriter and your cat's preferred spot is the warm glow of your laptop keyboard. While I'm talking about statistics, the other point I want to share with you is the importance of video. Using video generates 1,200% more shares on social media than text and image combined. And I'll let that just sit there for a second. Even animated GIFs get 167% more click-throughs. So if you're using social media to boost the profile of your business, why not experiment with video content by maybe going live in a group and talk about how you started your business? Alternatively, you could try an Instagram Reel, which is really impactful for engagement, and you could do the kind of point to text videos talking about the different services that you offer. If you're not brave enough to be seen, you can also use free tools like Canva to create a slideshow that features animations. Because from a social media perspective, it will still look like video, so you should still get that engagement. The last important note I want to make about social media is to not forget it's called social for a reason. Have a conversation. Don't let posting become one-sided. Ask your followers questions. Get them interacting with you. If they are responding to some of your posts, answer them back. It can't just be one-sided. And creating engagement with your followers can actually just be as simple as asking for advice. So maybe you have 2 different kinds of product. You could ask your followers which one they prefer for you to stock first. Humour can also work really well for engagement. Just think about the kind of content that you tend to share the most on social media. And more often than not, you'll find it's because it made you laugh. But just because you're not funny doesn't mean you can't reshare other people's posts. Just don't forget to credit. Hurrah for Gin, which is at the top of this slide, is actually one of my favourite accounts. From a consultant point of view, the client brief versus client budget posts might be relevant for a few of you watching. And you can also have more fun with behind the scenes pictures, particularly if your job is in a creative field. So for example, if you're a food stylist, can you share some food images before they've been styled and you've worked your magic? Or are there any secrets from the set that you could share in terms of how do you get a shot right? Photographers can also share a behind the scenes to getting a certain shot and then show the final finished polished version. If you want some examples of brands using humour when selling their product, Innocent does a really great job of this, as you can see in the example that I've used. And there's a whole series kind of on this theme. But I would give you a word of warning when using humour in content. And that important consideration is don't be tone deaf. Make sure you are aware of what is happening with world events. Remember, humour is subjective, so use it wisely. And if you can, get someone else to double check your content before posting. This example is actually from the 2011 protests in Cairo. And as you can well imagine, it was received really badly. Scheduling tools are also hugely popular on social media for better time management, but it's always wise to check your post, especially if you plan far in advance. Your post might have seemed innocuous when it was scheduled, but in real time, it may no longer be appropriate. So increasing the profile of your business is also about being recognized as an expert in your field. Content ideas that can help you do this include thinking about what you get asked about the most and sharing your advice on that subject. Roundups can also share your expertise. So let's say you're a HR consultant, for example. Could you share a roundup of the best HR tech for small businesses? Sharing your success. It might seem a bit boastful, but if you're a freelancer, you really need to become your own cheerleader. You could always share a testimonial from a client if that feels more comfortable, but look for a quote template on Canva to make your post more visually appealing. Seasonality is also another really great theme. If you're an event organizer, maybe you could write a 5 of the best venues with gardens that could be pegged to spring or summer, or even perhaps the spookiest venues with a nod to Halloween. And if you're really struggling, Google Trends or Answer the Public can also give you some inspiration based on what people are searching for in conjunction with your topic of expertise. When it comes to writing, where you place your content will have a bearing on what you write and how you write it. So if you're writing for your own website, you can afford to be a bit more direct and a bit more salesy when it comes to how your service can solve a particular pain point and addressing that in an article. Overall, however, if you think like a journalist and keep your headline short, it will make it much more likely to be read. Popular posts tend to be asking or answering a question. So for example, why you should use animal pictures in your social media posts. Numbered pieces or lists also perform well. Just look at BuzzFeed or Bored Panda, which essentially feature picture-led list pieces. You might not be familiar with Bored Panda, but it comes up on my social media feed all the time. For example, 30 hotel rooms you don't want to stay in is a recent piece that popped up on my social media feed, which probably says more about my reading habits than probably it should. Getting opinion pieces published can also help to position you as an expert. So many national newspapers, trade publications, or even local media are open to receiving articles that they can publish on an individual's expertise or even someone else's experience. If you're looking to place content in the press, be informative. So for example, if you're a photographer, you could pitch a piece around the best local beauty spots to take sunset pictures from. Editors are also interested in hearing opinions on industry or topical topics. But editors are more likely to want your piece if it's contrary to popular opinion or it raises a debate about something. Finally, end your piece with a takeaway or a call to action if it's on your own website. To further illustrate, these are a couple of headlines from opinion pieces featured in Metro and Huffington Post recently. The first one could have easily been written by a life coach or a tutor. Tips to help parents tackle feeling overwhelmed in lockdown. The second one, why I won't be homeschooling my kids this lockdown, could be considered controversial, even though a lot of parents will have had enough of it, so maybe not that controversial. The third is based on experience, what it's like teaching a Zoom class to students I've never met, And you can see how it could also work as a subtle plug for their business. Finally, remember how we looked at the importance of narrative? The struggle to success theme on the last one makes you want to read it. The pandemic closed my small business. Now I make a living streaming video games. But if it was easy, obviously everybody would be doing that. So it's worth bearing in mind that competition to get an opinion piece published in the Nationals is extremely tough. So don't expect to be published unless you have something really well informed to say based on your expertise, or you have a great angle. And actually that's why a lot of people choose to work with PRs, because they have more ideas on what could get published and what tends to work. I always recommend that businesses look for opportunities in their trade media or local press first. If you're not sure where to find places that take content, see what competitors are doing, as it might give you some clues. Aside from the press, don't forget about your own assets, so your own website, for example. But equally, don't discount LinkedIn. It's a really good place to actually post content on. Another idea, could you blog on another freelancer's website and vice versa to extend your reach? And also consider how you can repurpose your content to save you time. So for example, if you wrote 5 questions to ask a photographer before hiring, why not also turn it into a slideshow on Canva, and then you could use that across your other social media properties. Another avenue you might not have considered in boosting your profile is podcasts, either by appearing on some or even creating your own. It's actually why I started my podcast, Kids Review EdTech, which you can probably see in the EdTech screen grab I've included there. The idea was actually born from having to homeschool and work at the height of the pandemic. But I did also have an ulterior motive of building awareness as a content creator and being involved in technology PR. My podcast is on all the major platforms, so like Apple, Spotify, Google, and Amazon. And surprisingly, it's also a huge driver of traffic to my website. I was also asked if I was interested in a full-time position at an edtech company following one of the reviews that I did. From a networking with potential clients perspective, inviting someone onto a podcast to be interviewed is a much better door opener than an unsolicited invitation to talk to them about their business. But a word of caution, it does require dedication and commitment. So be prepared for a lot of investment before it pays off, unless you get very lucky. Building an audience takes time. And I think that's why a lot of people will try and look to be a guest on a podcast rather than starting their own. Finally, we are on to getting press coverage in different ways. So as well as posting your own content on social media, you can also use it to find opportunities. Journalists will often share on Twitter requests for experts or people to share their story. So for my own example, I was featured in Closer magazine last year talking about going freelance following a journalist request that was shared on Twitter. If you follow the hashtag journal request, you'll soon start seeing opportunities. Alternatively, there are paid for services available that direct journalist inquiries to your inbox, but the chances of success can be limited as everyone is receiving the alerts at the same time. And it also can get quite expensive as well. And finally, not all of those requests might be relevant for you. In fact, although this wasn't a Twitter request, I once reached out to an FT journalist who name dropped my client as a service that they used. This led me to setting up an interview with the CEO and the journalist, and eventually we actually secured coverage on the front page of the Financial Times. Now, I'm not going to say following journal request hashtags or reaching out to journalists on Twitter is going to get your business on the front of the FT, but you never know. So as you can see from some of the examples on this slide, Huffington Post is reaching out for kind of real life stories. There's a journalist here who is looking at a piece about how COVID has shaped production and shooting techniques. They want to speak to music TV historians, digital music media experts. Another person looking for women in tech ideas to pitch. Brexit experts. And then a product one, again for Huffington Post, looking for vegan cheese brands. Now these are obviously from a little while ago, so you probably won't want to pitch these now because their deadlines have probably passed, but it just gives you a flavour for the kind of posts that are on the journal request hashtag. So key takeaways. Define what your business story is and any obstacles that you've overcome. Use video on social media wherever possible, even if it's not directly of you. If it's an animated GIF or a slideshow, it's always worth using it. Tell, don't sell when writing blog or opinion pieces, and see where similar businesses to you have appeared in print if you're looking for ideas on where to target pitches. And finally, look for and respond to journalist requests, inquiries on Twitter.